Some other people.
So I want to thank everybody for coming out in this weather to hear about the Lower Village plans that have been in production. My name is Jesse Stedman. I'm the assistant planner here in the town of Stow. Before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that we are taping this tonight for folks at home to view, and it will be run over the next few weeks. So hopefully folks throughout town will have a chance to see it and then provide further comment. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm just going to go briefly over a little bit of the history of how we got here, and I know that we've had a chance to talk with some people here, and a lot of folks might be familiar with our history, but I'll get us up to speed. And then the consultants that we've been working with Howard Stein and Hudson, are going to go over some of the actual plans themselves and the different kinds of improvements and things that they have proposed with the help of the planning board and input from other departments. And we're going to hopefully hold all questions until the end. If you have any clarifying questions as we go through the slides, that's of course great to just get that out. But otherwise, we'll definitely save a lot of time at the end to go through the plans in depth and try to answer every question that folks have. So without further ado, we'll get started here. I just wanted to remind everybody that back in 2002, we had the Lower Village Committee formed, and that was a subcommittee of the planning board. And their major task back then was to provide some visual improvements and improve the functional and safety capacity of the Lower Village corridor. And that committee lasted for about 9 years, as you can see, through 2011. Some of the major things that happened during that time that helped get us to this point was in 2005, 2006, they hired a group called Fay, Spofford, and Thorndike, and they did the initial traffic study. So they were the first ones to do the traffic counts and to get an idea what the speeds were. They were also the first group that came out with different alternatives, including the roundabouts that I know had kind of circled for several years. It wasn't until 2009 when Kohler and Colantonio, another group, came in and really tried to figure out whether or not those roundabouts were feasible. And it turned out that due to site-specific constraints, due to all of the things that were happening at that intersection where we thought the roundabouts might work, it was just too much. And so that idea was abandoned, and they moved on to some different alternative concepts. And so Kohler and Colantonio had produced the last concept plan. Some time had passed. We really had a chance to look that plan over again, and it's helped us get to this point. So we can go to the next slide. So during that time, a lot of things actually came to the surface. Some of the big findings from those 9 years on the committee were that the temporary traffic islands out there that we know and love actually did reduce traffic incidents. Some of the streetscape specifications, down to just the width and the spacing of the trees and the fences, that came from that committee. And they also came up with some action steps as well, creating those streetscape standards, getting those islands in, making improvements to the sidewalk. I know that's when the Lower Village Common was expanded a little bit, and some things happened over by Gardner Road. So some things definitely happened during that time, but certainly things have been moving faster since we've gotten involved with Howard Stein and Hudson, and we decided to take a better look at these concept plans. And they are going to talk to you a little bit about some of the research that they went and did, again, because it had been so many years, and I think we've really got a fresh look at what's going on in Lower Village and a really realistic idea of how people are using it on a day-to-day basis. So I'm happy to have worked with them. So I'll hand it over to them now. Howard Stein and Hudson, Joseph San Clemente and Bridget Myers, who we've both been working with, and they'll take it from here.
All right, great. Thanks again for everybody for coming out. Happy to have you here. I'm happy to be working on this project. We've been working with the town for a few months now to go through all the work, great work that's been done, and really build off of that. We've done quite a bit of data collection to really understand what's happening out there and see how we can refine all the work that has been done and move it towards a design concept. The ultimate goal is to get to a MassWorks funding grant application towards the end of the month, which means that we're trying to advance the concept as far as we can. So we're happy to get as much comments from everyone here tonight. And if there are things you can't see on the screen, feel free to ask comments at the end of the presentation. I'd like to try to get through just a few quick slides, and I'll also be hanging around at the end of the night, and we can talk at the board and draw on it if you like, if you have other ideas or suggestions of things that we can do for the plan. This is the concept plan that was done in 2012 by Kohler Colantonio, and this is really the base starting point that we were handed when we began. This is very conceptual. It was done on an aerial. It was based on some of the information that was collected before and really gave us that starting point. And we looked at this and we said, well, let's try to make this a real design plan, moving in with actually collecting land survey data that shows us where the right-of-way is, where property lines are, doing a much more detailed data collection and observations. We're out here during the weekday morning and evening peak periods, and we also came out during a Saturday midday to observe how are left turn conditions, what are pedestrian and bicycle conditions like, what are the queuing conditions. And we also took a look at vehicle classification. How many heavy vehicles do we have on the roadway? How fast are people traveling? And we also looked at crash data to understand if there are any safety issues along the corridor that we should be aware of. All along while working very closely with the town planning staff and the public works to really understand what some of the key concerns are as we work to refine that concept into a design plan. And we had also had several meetings with some of the key abutters. I know that the planning staff had additional conversations with planning board members, some of the residents in the area, and we've been getting this feedback pretty much every day over the last couple months as we make small tweaks to the plan to keep moving it along. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the data collection efforts that we did and talk about some of the observations that we made. I think a lot of these findings were identified in some of the previous efforts, and if anything, this may either confirm it or expand upon some of the findings that were done before. But we did very detailed data collection. These are turning movement counts, counting every vehicle, pedestrian, or bicycle that went through each of those yellow dots in the corridor. There were 12 of them. We counted every driveway and roadway from Deerfield Lane all the way to White Pond Road. And we also conducted continuous traffic recorder counts. Those are the tubes that go across the road so we can monitor traffic over a longer period, not just during the peak hours. Some of the issues that are out there are the pedestrian crossing conditions. Really taking a hard look at where you have crosswalks. There are 3 crosswalks out there today. We do feel that the addition of the temporary traffic islands have been beneficial at maintaining lower speeds in Lower Village, and it does provide some refuge, but it's still a temporary refuge. You don't quite feel that great in the middle of the roadway while you're out there behind the barrels and the curb. Meanwhile, there are some other obvious deficiencies out there. You have a sidewalk along the north side of the roadway, but really it's pretty discontinuous on the south side of the roadway. This particular crosswalk leads into a planted shrub area. It's not really a great connection between the businesses, nor is it handicap accessible. Bicycle conditions in the roadway are very minimal. If you're a cyclist, you're really pretty much forced to be in the roadway, which doesn't have any shoulder. The fog line, as you can see, is right along the edge of the roadway. So it's not a great place, even if you're a very experienced cyclist, but it's going to deter anyone that's not an experienced cyclist that's out there. Meanwhile, this sidewalk is on the south side of the roadway, and it's one of those small discontinuous pieces that kind of meanders around a telephone pole and isn't really in the best shape. Meanwhile, access management is another concern that we have. There are a lot of driveways along this corridor. If you're a pedestrian or cyclist or even a motorist, it means that there's a lot of places where vehicles can be pulling in and out of, which really adds some uncertainty to the roadway. When you're driving down the roadway, where's somebody going to turn in or out of? If you're a pedestrian walking down the roadway, if you envision that you're adding a sidewalk on the roadway, you don't want to have a lot of these conflict points. We like to try to reduce the number of access points so that it's clear where vehicles are turning in and out of and where they're not. Here's one down near the auto body shop where you can see a woman walking across. This is the largest curb cut. It's about 200 feet wide, but many of the curb cuts on the corridor are 40, 50 feet wide. Typically, we look for 20, 30 feet wide for a standard curb cut. Meanwhile, there are also some other concerns about driveway locations with respect to crosswalks. Here's one over near the former gas station, and maybe you can take a left in there, maybe you can't, but it's also right near a crosswalk. And so those are the types of things that we look at. Where is it safe to have people cross or make turns? Some other issues are down over Red Acre Road and Pompasiticate Street, where we have a lot of turning accommodation along the corridor. For most of the corridor, we have a two-way left turn lane, meaning you can turn left in either direction, or we have dedicated left turn lanes. But actually, where you really need the turn lanes, Red Acre Road and Pompasiticate Street, you actually don't have a turn lane. It's interesting that we saw this little carve-out near Red Acre Road on the south side of the roadway where a car can just sneak in there and get around somebody making a left. Meanwhile, down at Pompasiticate, you have the auto body, the huge curb cut, which actually ends up just functioning like a bypass roadway so people can get around it. The drainage is definitely something that needs to be upgraded out there. We have undersized drainage line. In the line that is out there, it's a very antiquated pipe. It's in rusted condition, really poor shape. And that's something that we would be addressing as part of this project. You could see some of the ponding that occurs in the roadway, and asphalt, once it gets wet, you have ponding that just starts to break up. I imagine that those potholes are just going to keep growing over the next few months. And one of the other issues, too, are some of the catch basins. Meanwhile, you have catch basins that are in the middle of the roadway, and there's not a lot of curbing on the roadway, so there's nowhere to guide that water and get it off the roadway. We typically like to see catch basins up against curbs to collect that. So as we started going through some of the data that we collected, just some interesting facts about what we saw out there. Traffic volumes. There's about 16 to 17,000 vehicles a day that travel along Lower Road, which is pretty moderate for this type of roadway. It's a major arterial roadway. But interestingly, since in the last 8 to 10 years, the volumes really have not substantially changed. They've remained relatively flat, and this is something that we've seen pretty much statewide, where traffic volumes have actually gone down in the last few years and stabilized over the last 10 years or so. Whether it be fuel prices or the recession or people choosing other alternatives, I'm not sure, but we have seen a lot of volume stabilize everywhere. The travel speeds, the posted speed limit's 35. The average speed is actually a little bit lower. Most people are going slightly lower, but what we really like to look at are what are the outliers. 2 in the morning, do we have people doing 70? And the good news is that we really don't. We did not see a lot of excessive speeds. The 95th percentile, see, these are the top 5% fastest people on the roadway. We're only going 40 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. So whatever it is that's out there is working. I think that those the splitter islands that act as pedestrian refuges do seem to be helping out there. There's some activity on the roadway that does slow things down. In terms of overall safety, we're not seeing a lot of crashes on this roadway. There were only 28 crashes at all 12 intersections over a 3-year period, which is very low. And we look at it in terms of the rate of crashes, it's extremely low versus the statewide average. So no particular issues that we have to zone in on and say we have a safety issue at any particular location. But I would say that the largest issue out here is that it's very auto-oriented. We don't have good pedestrian bicycle accommodations. So while we didn't see many pedestrian and bicycle-related crashes, there's just not a lot of opportunities for them to be out there. So we did count all the people that were walking and biking out there. Most people are walking on the north side of the roadway because that's where you have the longest span of sidewalk, except when you get over near the town common, it starts to, you can't walk in front of it along the roadway. But there was about 6 pedestrians per hour during the peak periods, and that was pretty continuous. Crossing the roadway, we saw about 2 pedestrians per hour, and those are at the various crossways that we counted. So pretty marginal. And interestingly, the cyclist activity was higher than the pedestrian activity. So there were 4 to 8 daring cyclists that were riding down Route 117, and that's per hour. The turn accommodations, when we looked at all the volumes, we looked at left turn volumes at every single driveway and roadway along the corridor. In order to install a 2-way left turn lane, which is what you have for most of the corridor that's out there, you need to hit certain warrant requirements. Basically, a certain percentage of left turns versus opposing of volume to make it justified to put it in. And what we found out is that the 2-way left turn lane is really not warranted. And actually, by watching operations in the 2-way left turn lane, we found that it's really not functioning that well. In most cases, when you're really down in the west end of the corridor over near Deerfield Lane, the lane is simply too small. I think it goes down to about 6 feet wide. A car is about 6 or 7 feet wide. And we're actually seeing cars getting halfway in the turning lanes and blocking the through traffic. So a lot of the turning lane accommodation that we have out there is just simply inadequate. And further, what we found is that a dedicated left turn lane, if we were going to get rid of the two-way left turn lane and do dedicated left turn lanes into businesses or roadways, there were none required or warranted in the westbound direction. So that means left turns into the south side of the roadway. The only place that a left turn lane was required was the eastbound direction, which makes sense. We have the shopping plaza and the post office, where you have a lot more demand going to. So what we propose is a real complete street design for the corridor, improving the roadway so that we have ADA compliant sidewalks, that we have a bicycle accommodation, which means a 4-foot shoulder, so that those advanced cyclists can get out of the way of the vehicles, but they have a safe place to be rather than in the middle of the roadway, and they don't have to go on the sidewalk. They have a place to be. Reorganizing all the turn lanes, rethinking about where do we need turn lanes, where don't we need the turn lanes, so that we can reallocate that space for the other users, and providing a landscape buffer. So you still have that feel of the roadway, and it separates the sidewalk from the roadway, so you don't feel like you're right on the edge of the roadway when you're walking down the street, and provides some opportunity for landscaping that's out there. Updating the drainage system is going to be really important as part of this. And then what we were able to do is actually do all this without relocating any utility poles, which was a heroic challenge that Bridget was able to fit this cross-section in without moving it. Utility pole relocation is expensive and it's time-consuming, and it's something that we were able to squiggle the roadway through, if that's a good word for it. So I apologize if this is small at the end of the night. I'm happy to, if you want to see the slide again and come up closer, or I can point it out on the board. But basically what we're looking at is, overall what I want to start by saying is that the right-of-way that we have out there is very variable. Often when we work on a roadway, there's a standard 60-foot wide layout or a 40-foot wide layout. But what we have is that the layout that the town owns for the roadway varies anywhere from 50 to 75 feet. So we had some challenges where the right-of-way changes. We're looking at doing 11-foot travel lanes that would be in the middle, would have either a 10-foot turning lane, or in some locations it would have a median. In some cases the median would be raised, in some cases it would be a painted median. And I can go into detail with that. We'd have a 4-foot bike lane, and then we're looking at a raised curb on each side, but it would be a asphalt curb. That would be the black curbing, not granite. And then there would be generally at least a 3-foot grass strip on each side, separating the 5-foot sidewalk from the roadway. In some cases, that grass strip will get a little bit bigger as we work to meander the sidewalk around the utility poles, so we don't have to move any of those. There are 4 pieces of the plan that I'm going to go through, and once again, if you can't see it, I'd be glad to walk you through afterwards. This is the western end from Deerfield Lane in Elmridge Road. One thing that was really challenging was trying to figure out where to put the crosswalks and where to put the turn lanes in relation to the crosswalks. I think as you get up just east of Elmridge Road, over near the pizza place, there's what we call a crest vertical curve. So it's a hill in the roadway alignment. And it's something that, unless you put the crosswalk right on top of it, it's not a safe place to cross the street because you can't see the cars coming over the hill. So what we chose was to have it on the farthest end, west end of it, where you have actually good sight lines to that hill. It actually allows people coming from Deerfield Lane to cross, and I know that there's some playing fields down on the south end of the roadway, and working with the town, we thought that that might be one of the best locations to put it. As you'll see, we do have a left turn lane going down Elmridge Road, and then we do have, in a few locations, a raised curb median in a few locations. And I'd be happy to answer questions at the end and talk about some of the rationale. I'd be happy to talk about it more. And what we tried to do is on each end of the corridors was to have some raised sections in the roadway, so that if you're a motorist, when you're entering in Lower Village, that you say, hey, something different's happening here. I might need to slow down because this is a pedestrianized area. And we do feel that those islands in the middle of the roadway do help to calm the traffic that's out there. Going down a little bit further, this is over at Sam Prescott Drive in the post office. The one location where we do have a westbound left turn lane is into the House of Pizza. It was the only place that had enough volume to really justify it. But then we'd have dedicated left turn lanes going into Sam Prescott Drive, and then heading into the into the shopping plaza. And then over here is another mid-block crossing that's protected by islands so that you have a refuge. You only have to cross one lane at a time as you're getting across the street. And then here's the further down the road towards the common. In this section, we have another crosswalk with another refuge. And then over here, this is actually a striped center island in the middle that will help kind of visually narrow the travel lanes so that people don't feel like they have this great wide roadway that's out there. And then we were also proposing to add, actually let me go back to the other slide. This left turn lane is into Red Acre Road, where we currently don't have one today. And then there's another left turn lane going into Pompasiticus Street. And then this goes all the way down to White Pond Road, where we would end our project limits. And so with that, I'd just like to get into some of the next steps. We're here tonight presenting you the current design that we have. We're working towards completing a MassWorks grant application with the state for funding. That grant application process requires that you have a very developed plan set, that it's pretty much shovel ready to go in the springtime, which would be then we're envisioning about a 1-year construction period if the project is selected. What we'd like to do is collect as many comments tonight as we can over the next couple of weeks to be able to keep revising the plans, and then that revised plan set will go in with the application package. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Jesse.
Yeah, I'm just going to go over a couple of where we go from here and how this fits into the bigger picture of some of the Lower Village planning efforts that we've been undertaking here. So this fall, we're going to continue working with some of the property owners down in Lower Village, some of the business owners, to try to come up with a way to increase the water infrastructure down there. The governor just recently signed a bill that allows for exploration of water down on Heritage Lane, which I know went to town meeting a year or so ago. And so we're hoping that we can at least get that exploration underway and see if it's feasible. One of the things we're going to be doing in the meantime is working with the state to come up with the kind of language that would help us craft a lease that would help the town do this and help us work with the business owners. So it's a public-private partnership is what we're hoping for, and it's really a key to unlocking some of the potential down in Lower Village. So that's going to be ongoing. And then as we go into winter of this year, what we want to do at the same time is think about what that village looks like right now, how these traffic upgrades would also work hand in hand with the kind of design that may happen if new development were to start taking shape down there. We know we have some property owners who are itching to get going. Should water be available, we want to make sure that we're having the kind of development coming in that actually complements the road upgrades that we just went and undertook. Some of those things, we've talked a lot about the deep setbacks. We've talked a lot about the design of the buildings. We've heard a lot at our other meetings about kind of the rural character and this kind of respect for the history of Stow and for the region as a whole. And so we want to try to incorporate these things in a holistic way rather than piecemeal. And that's why we've been kind of trying to take on a lot of these issues all at once so that we can actually build something around some of the traffic upgrades. So that's what's coming up. We're certainly going to be having some more meetings and some more trying to get at some of those design issues. But I'm going to hand it back over to you folks in the audience just to have some questions answered. Yeah, it would be best if folks would come up to the microphone. We are taping it, and it's great for everybody to be able to hear it. So thank you.
I noticed you only designed 4-foot bike lanes,
Yes.
and those are not compliant with the ASHTO guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
They're with curbs.
Yep.
The guideline is to have 5-foot bike lanes, not 4. And actually, because you just the travel lane at 11 feet is actually rather small.
Mm-hmm.
So usually the accommodation in that case is actually make the travel lane larger and not mark a bicycle lane.
Mm-hmm.
Is that considerable? I mean, because marking a bike lane, and I'm not sure that any bicycles have actually had input into this plan at all. I'm a regular cyclist, and a 4-foot bike lane with a curb is not acceptable.
Right.
And it's not in the guidelines. Don't recommend that.
Mm-hmm.
Wondering what you consider on that.
Thank you for the comment. And It has been a challenge to fit everything in the right-of-way. Originally, when we first made a pass at this, we had 11-foot lanes with a 3-foot shoulder, which we felt was largely inadequate for cyclists on the roadway, where you're looking at a shallow situation where shared lane
Well,
accommodation.
shared lane is actually better.
Yep.
A 12-foot shared lane and a 3-foot shoulder would be much more accommodating cyclists.
Yeah, I
That's
appreciate
very
the
typical, like in Lexington.
Yeah.
You probably been down Mass Ave in Lexington. That's marked clearly with arrows in it, the shared arrows.
Okay, no, thank you
think
for
would be
the
much-
comment. We'll definitely take a closer
Okay.
look at it. We, as part of the design process, we did actually reach out to Mass DOT's Complete Streets engineer
Yeah.
to talk about that type of preference of what kind of marking or signage
Yeah.
or lane marking, but we're definitely still open to
Yeah.
making adjustments to it. I think
Well-
in terms of the overall width, I think we're only going to have that 15-foot section to work with. I think we got it right up to the poles as close as we
Yeah.
could, and but I'm happy to look at it closer.
Yeah, I think that you'll find that most cyclists prefer a wider lane, travel lane and not a smaller shoulder.
Okay.
Because that first of all enables them to move around obstacles much easier.
So your preference would be a 12-foot lane with a 3-foot shoulder?
Or even a 13-foot lane with a
Yeah.
2-foot shoulder.
Okay.
Anything. But,
Thank you.
Yeah, and actually if you read the AASHTO guidelines, that's in fact what they recommend with streets less than 15 feet is a wider travel lane.
Okay, thank you.
Can we go back to the Elm Ridge Road slide?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That little teeny house
Yep.
is a residence, not
Yes,
a business.
Yep.
It's built in 1720 with a historic wall, and I need to be able to make a left-hand turn into my driveway. Elm Ridge Road, I don't know if you did a study particularly on that. There is a lot of emergency vehicle traffic going back to the housing back there.
Yep.
I mean, daily basis, multiple. So if I'm stuck trying to make a left-hand turn, I could be blocking an emergency vehicle.
So there's a left-hand turn into
Right
there.
now, it's the end of the middle turn lane, and that's where I have to sit to wait
Right.
to get into a left-hand turn to turn into my house, because I work in Waltham, so I'm always making a left-hand turn into that. So that is a home, and there is a historic wall to the west of the driveway.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how that's going to affect a sidewalk, if there's going to be a sidewalk put in there.
Yeah.
Currently, there's not a sidewalk. The sidewalk ends right around the property line.
Yeah, okay, so a couple things. So the sidewalk, actually you can see the blue line is the property line, and we actually are a couple feet away from that. So it's all within the roadway layout. So I don't believe that we'd impact the wall. I'd have to go back and take a look at the
Because
plans
there's
to
not
see where it is.
much berm right now between the historical wall and the road. So I'm not sure
We'll
how
take a
that's
look.
gonna be put in.
If it's close, it could be something where we look at reducing the buffer to move the sidewalk away from it, but we can definitely go back and take a
But there
look.
definitely is a lot of emergency vehicle traffic going to Elm Ridge Road.
Yeah, and I think that the hope is that vehicles can get out of the way. I think that what we tried to do is minimize the length and the number of the raised sections. Ideally, we wanted to have a lot of raised sections to really have that traffic calming effect, but this is the largest one that's out there because we wanted that ability for cars to be able to get out of the way if they had to. If you are taking a left in here, you do have this extra width where if you were pulling up and you had to wait, you could wait opposite the
I
left
can just
turn
envision
lane
us getting
to get out.
rear-ended, though. If
But what I'm
we
saying
have
is I
to
think you
go
could
around a
actually,
raised-
you could pull into the middle of the roadway and someone could get around you, around
Yeah,
the bike lane.
but they are very impatient people. Yeah, it's going to be very hard to make a turn when there's a raised structure there.
Right.
And plus, what happens when it snows with the plowing? Because they already plow me in every time they plow. So I'm afraid with a raised structure, that's even going to be worse. So that's my big concern there. And I had another one, and I can't remember what it was now. But I do want to remind, it is a residence. I don't know why it's zoned
Yep.
commercial. It is a residence. So I would like it to be treated like a residence
Yeah.
and not like a business.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the comments. Thank you. Yeah. Well, hold on. If we could just let her go first, let her comment. Thank you.
Jean Romer, Warren Road and Stowe. I have lived in Stowe for a long time, and Stowe has not thought it appropriate to plow the sidewalks in winter. I think that the policy should change with this. I don't know what is said about that in the new regulations for sidewalks, but I know that a lot of people jog and run and walk on a long Great Road in the winter, and including me walking sometimes. And I've tried to walk where it's where there's the snow has been plowed, but often people are walking on Great Road on it just seems incredibly dangerous. If you go to all the trouble to install sidewalks, I mean, I think they should be plowed. So that was one. And the other thing is, I think it's great to have attractive fencing and vegetation and landscaping. I think it's just really important also to make sure that for cars pulling out on 117, either east or west, that the fencing and vegetation doesn't impede their view. I think some of it does a little bit now, and I would just like to see it low enough or back enough farther so it doesn't do that.
Agree. Thank you very much. I don't know if-
I'm Mark Jones. I'm curious what you think about actually reducing the rise in the road to the east of Elm Ridge. Is there any reason from your point of view on a design perspective to take the road down about 3 feet so that rise goes away and you can have a lot more flexibility in terms of visibility and maybe even sidewalks as appropriate?
Bridget, I don't know if you want to, she's our civil engineer on the project, so yeah.
Well, right now, with the MassWorks grant, we're working kind of with the construction budget for this project. So, reducing the profile of a road, we're getting into just more involved construction. It'll be, completely ripping up the street, taking it down, and rebuilding that area, and that will also affect what's to the side of that area of the road, because you'll have to grade it in somehow. That'll also lower the sidewalks and in turn lower grades around the sidewalks. So, it's basically just a more involved way of doing it that would probably put us way over budget for this grant. So, right now we're just proposing to do a mill and overlay of the road. So we weren't really getting into any full depth construction with this project right now.
Hi, Ross Perry, 4 Circuit Drive. You had mentioned in the beginning that you were going to consolidate some of the driveways. Can you say more about what's being consolidated?
Yeah, I think as we started going through it, I think there was probably less consolidation and more tightening. I think that as we started introducing sidewalks on both sides of the roadway, one thing that we like to do is introduce aprons on some of the driveways. So you don't have this, you're going up and down the sidewalk as you're going over driveways. So I think that's one improvement where it allows vehicles to slow to a pedestrian walking on the sidewalk, kind of gives them the right of way. I think it's predominantly mostly tightening that we're doing. There's one relocation over near the mixed office building where we looked at the current driveways on the eastern side, and we've been working with the landowner to try to move it over to more in line with Sam Prescott Drive. We like to try to line driveways up where possible, but that is a tightening. I'm trying to think of if we actually did eliminate any. I think for the most part, it's predominantly a tightening that's happening. Yeah.
Used to have two.
Yeah.
Used to have two, now have one.
Yeah, and maybe so. I think that's one that we did try to eliminate, but they still have 2 curb cuts. Yeah, I think that we often see places that have 3 curb cuts, and the idea is that 2 is reasonable, but once you have 3, then there's a lot of different places where people can come.
How about down by the car dealership?
Yeah, and down in the car dealership. So we've been talking to both of these landowners, actually right here, and they have a very large curb cut between it. We talked about having a shared driveway there, but tightening it down. I think it's upwards of 60 feet wide today, and we were looking at going down to about 40. The standard curb cut's about 24 feet. And then moving down the road where the auto body, they have about that 200-foot wide curb cut today. We're looking at it going to about, I think, 50 feet and moving it. We generally like to line curb cuts up with roadways and the driveways, but in this particular case, we felt that this one should actually be offset from Pompasiticate just because of the heavy left turn volume in and right turn volume out. So I hope I answered your question.
On the Stow
Yep.
House Pizza, the
Yep.
one that you added
Mhm.
and on the west side.
Yep.
I'd be afraid that that is right at the end of, that's within where the ground is pretty high, that people
Mhm.
aren't going to see that.
Okay.
Put it right at the,
Because it's
Right
sloped
at
up
the-
there right
Yeah, we
now.
try to get it actually right at the top, because we're worried if you're on either side of the hill, then you
Getting
wouldn't
out
be
of
able
there,
to see it.
though, when you're going,
Yep.
you're going to have to go up a hill to get out onto the
Yep.
road. That's going to cause some
Is that
problems.
line the hiding way?
Well, the other actually,
This is about the high point in the
What's
roadway.
that
It-
line there?
No, that's, it's hard to see, but that's actually a cross-section dimension on the plan. I apologize.
I do a lot of biking down there. I don't know if I was one of the 8 that you recorded or
Yeah,
not.
you might have been.
But actually, I find a 4-foot space, especially since essentially it's
Yeah.
one way, there's really 8 feet of bike space, right? You've got 4 going east and 4 going west. It's better than nothing. I like having it delineated with a line versus something that you're not necessarily sure where you are versus where the cars are. So I think overall, this is a very nice design. I'm almost sorry to see the roundabouts go, because I thought that would have been intriguing, but this is a nice design.
Thank you.
I'm Don Hawks. I live out of town, but I go through there a lot, and I'm on the Board of Selectmen. I'm liaison to the Planning Board. A couple of comments. One is we're always welcoming new businesses into town. So when you're identifying the site as auto body, would you add auto body and Hobbyland? One of your
Sorry.
earlier slides, there's a new business struggling. We want to encourage people to go buy their kids' toys and things there. They have some great deals. So please plug that. But what is the construction material for the raised islands? Is that bituminous concrete as well?
I believe it's bituminous curbing, and then the interior of the island, I think we're still talking about what the material will be, whether it be a planted island in between. Bridget, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that.
I think right now we're,
Just-
Yeah.
for the raised sections, right now, we're looking at landscaped islands, just to add, for more of an aesthetic purpose. We haven't really narrowed down specific plantings or anything like that. We're always welcome to ideas, but they were proposed to be landscaped as opposed to just a concrete or an asphalt island.
What's the experience been in your professional assessment of middle-of-the-road blacktop berms, in effect is what they are, with snowplows in the winter? Isn't there a lot of risk for a lot of damage and have to rebuild them in the spring?
Yeah, I think that it's something that the snowplow drivers are going to get more used to having them each year, and I think that it might be something where we look at, is there a medium-sized plan? We don't like to put very high plantings on things that are out in the roadway, or you could do the delineators, which are like the reflectorized stakes that go in. Maybe those go out in the fall before the winter, so that you have the plow drivers have something to guide them, during the winter months while they're out there. But I think if you do things like that where they can find them, then they can manage. But the asphalt berm is definitely not as good as the granite, but we had heard from the beginning that the granite was something that folks weren't really excited about, having granite curving along the roadway. And it is also a lot more expensive to do granite. It's a lot more expensive.
Okay, the last comment I'll make is, from my passing knowledge of the town budget, I don't believe we have any sidewalk plows now. This is one of those things that we're right on the edge here as civilization overcomes us here in Stow. That people like the rural country roads, the effect of it, but a lot of people move into town and say, we want more sidewalks, we want more bike lanes, and then it becomes more like Lexington and Waltham and whatever else. Not that those are bad places to live, I just don't choose to be there. But I think it's a budgetary thing as well. Obviously, if we get to the point where we have significant sidewalks in town, the town will have to confront that as a budgetary issue. It means more manpower. Certainly, one of these little Bobcat plows or whatever they Bombardier, I guess, is the one that makes those. But that's something that is not provided for now. But as response to the comment, it may come to that at some point, but we don't have the capability to do it now. But overall, this is a great improvement. And I have noticed a significant calming of the traffic through there, even with the temporary islands. or refuges, or whatever you're calling them. But, so I do think this will provide much more safety, and I was surprised to see the speed limit data that you collected in there. That's encouraging, so we don't have to shoot the police down there with radar guns or something. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
When you did the traffic studies, were you taking into account that we have a number of business fronts that are empty right now, that they don't have traffic coming into them because they're vacant? Once they have business, is that going to affect the turning?
Yeah, so I think that we do look, when we do our analysis, we look at the traffic volumes, we do grow the volumes. In some cases, some of the businesses don't have turn volumes going into them. A lot of the businesses that don't have the turning volume are on the south side of the roadway. There is that potential that if there was a higher and greater use at some of these parcels, that there could be the potential to put a turning lane in. I think there's some locations in here, particularly down on the eastern side, where you have a striped island that could be turned into a left turn lane if it is warranted. I think what we didn't want to do was put in a lot of turn lanes that weren't necessarily needed. And we actually found that if you don't put them in the westbound direction, it might actually help create gaps in the traffic stream so that it's easier to get out of some of the busier businesses on the north side of the roadway.
Because we don't have a turn lane right now where the dentist and the ATM and the little cafe, there's curves isn't there anymore. We have quite a few places that are vacant, but there doesn't look like there's a turn lane for the ATM. And I don't know about everybody else, but I bank at Bank of America. So I'd like to be able to make a left-hand turn into the bank. It's just an ATM, but there are a lot of, there are empty storefronts right there right now.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry.
Good evening, folks. I'm representing the cemetery department, and you just heard some of our comments and things. I just wanted to really thank the board members of the planning board, yourselves, to putting this together and things like that. Our concerns at the cemetery department was because of adequate parking, burials, visiting parking, things in that fashion. With a 6-inch curb was going to be a little of a situation, me getting equipment in there. I actually took a tape measure and checked where my hubs were, plus my rear ends, and they're 7 inches. So anybody's cars and things on that would be quite a heavy type of thing. Having the adequate crosswalks to getting in, if you got Pompo there, that was a real big issue for us because, as Karen found out, that we are in the process of having more burials, more things in that area as we open that up. So I know it's tight over there. Sidewalk being across there, I understand that you have to have a 6 to 7 inch because your sidewalk's going to be close to that. So some of my sidewalks was to move either the sidewalks or put them in the middle, go behind that telephone pole that you got about 5 feet in there, things in that fashion. I mean, we'll be getting together, but I just wanted to really show our concerns.
Yeah, we're happy to work with you on that to figure out what kind of demand or how often you need to get in there, or how many parking spaces you might need. I understand there's some events where you might, not events, but there are services might happen where you have more vehicles at one time. That might happen a couple times a year, but then just for maintenance, whether or not we do a curb cut to get in there. But we'd like to work with you to try to figure out what makes life easier for you.
Well, staying above ground's one
to make it work. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll be working on that. I guess.
That sounds good.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Linda Hathaway. I live at 76 Crescent Street, but I do frequent the business on the south side, so I do like that whole idea of the turn lanes and things like that. Anyway, question for the planning board, and if we're doing any grants or anything for this, as part of the sidewalk clearing, do they give grants for the equipment to take care of the sidewalks, to plow in the winter or anything like that, instead of the town having to purchase it?
Not that we're aware of.
Not, okay.
Not this particular grant. There may be other grants.
Other grants or something that would be, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Tom Porcher again. I did have a concern with the left turn lane into Pompasiticate. I don't know if you've ever been there in the afternoon or evening or in the morning even, and that that looks like it only hold about 1.5 cars, because there isn't much space between those two streets. And I was wondering if is there any other accommodation that can be made for the cars turning into Pompacitic? I live on Red Acre Road, so clearly, there's always, that backs up and you can't you can't turn left out of Red Acre Road because of that. I mean, marking it that way is great, but are the people really going to do that?
No, it's a good comment. It's an area that we've looked at a lot. It's a tough location. In
Yeah.
a perfect world, I'd love to move those roads. But
Well, we'd like a roundabout.
that's not an option that we could do there. And without introducing new traffic control, which really isn't warranted at these locations, it's hard to do much more. I think that when we went out, we did see that, the queues weren't terribly long going into Pompacitic. There were generally a few vehicles long. I think in the morning you have that really heavy left turn, but we noticed that the opposing volume on Great Road was actually very low.
Yeah.
So there's enough gaps in the morning that it keeps that queue moving. And in the evening, it's the same situation where most people are taking right out of Pompacitic, coming back in the evening.
Yeah, well, one of the things that people very rarely stop at the stop sign in Pompacitic.
Yeah.
It's
Because there's not a lot of people on Great Road. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it also means you can't get out of Red Acre Road.
Right.
And so there's, additional traffic enforcement would be good there. But I'm not sure if that, I'm also wondering about this space here.
Yeah.
That's part of Lower Common. Is that currently being managed by the town or not?
That I'm not sure of,
Okay.
actually.
Does anybody know? This area here, it's actually.
This right in here?
This is owned by the town and actually part of the Lower Common. And I'm wondering what the current status of that is. Does anybody know?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
The highway department
Yeah.
isn't here. I
Okay.
don't believe they're maintaining it at this point.
Yeah,
I think
the homeowner is
the
maintaining it?
homeowner abutting the property.
Yeah, okay. But it's.
Thanks.
That area is actually one of the areas where we could have taken some of that area and used it possibly for other traffic accommodations for that, possibly joining the two roads. I mean, that could have been one of the things, because the town does own that land.
Yeah, I think that when we got started with this, I think that we recognized all the work that was done before, and that there didn't seem to be a large consensus on doing substantial changes to the geometry at those locations. And I think that today you got two roadways that don't have any left turn accommodation, and we're hoping that this at least provides some marginal benefit from what you have out there today, where you do have a dedicated place to turn. We do try to organize it a little bit better with islands and pavement markings. I think without really separating the two roadways, any further widening probably wouldn't give you much more benefit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right now,
Yeah.
with the way that there's going to be a curb on the right now, so that's going to keep people from passing on the right, correct?
Yes.
So that's going to make more of a problem with the queue, because even though there's not technically a left turn, people pass on the right. That's why there's not many cars in the queue, but that's because everybody just goes around them.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Bridget, but I believe that we held the curb line knowing that, because you'll often see one guy trying to take a left, and it allows the people to take the right around it. So we try to keep that width the same. So the island that's there today where the telephone pole is, we can't move because there's a telephone pole in it. And I think I believe we did try to hold that curb line because we saw that it was providing that benefit.
He's talking about the south.
On Great Road, I'm sorry.
The south
Yep.
curb.
When you're going
Yep.
eastbound on Great Road, you just go around the person who's turning left on
Yep.
Pompacitic. If there's a curb on the right, we can't go
Yep.
around, because now if there's more than one car in there, you're going to have a backup.
Right, but now you have a left turn lane, which you don't have today. And today, you have to go through, you only have it if you go through the auto body driveway, if you're out there today. So we're actually not narrowing the roadway down. If anything, we're widening from what's out there today. So you would be able to get around these vehicles, whether they're going to Red Acre Road or whether they're going into Pompacitic, you could go around those left turners.
As I said, I think this is a substantial improvement over what we've got and what we've seen before. But have you thought about actually taking some of that land to the south? I mean, I think you've done a great job in fitting everything in your constraints, but why not look outside the box a little bit, literally outside the right-of-way, and see if you can obtain some of that land as an easement or however.
Okay, all right, so if we were to take some land from there, it actually wouldn't provide the benefit that it would if we were to move the roadways apart. I think that's the only way that would really help accommodate a larger queue. If we took more land, it wouldn't actually give us any more queue storage or the ability to go around anyone. And I think that in some cases we actually are working with those landowners on some easements to actually fit in the sidewalk in that location. You can see the blue line does go through the sidewalk in some locations. So we actually are getting right near the edge of that property in that location.
Because people are right, the people have been cutting through the parking lot there
Yeah.
at the auto parts. It's actually where my wife's school used to be. But why not just sort of,
Yeah.
make that official and make that a
Right.
passing lane? If you need more width,
Right. Well, today you only have 2 travel lanes. You have 1 in each direction. And we're actually adding that 3rd lane in the middle. We're adding the width for a 3rd lane. So we're actually formalizing that width that's out there
Okay.
today. So you can't look at it as we're adding a curb and eliminating that bypass. We're actually formalizing that bypass and making it so you can get around the left turners.
Could you go to
Yep.
the slides on
Just- Yep.
So,
Can you stand up by the mic for the
Yep.
did you consider moving Red Acre Road over I mean, there was obviously that room in the common except for the trees that are there. The Red Acre Road could actually be moved considerably, like 25 feet. That would greatly increase not only the storage capacity of the left turn lane, but also the interval between the 2 roads as people are entering and leaving.
I think, as I said, when we got into this, we really looked at a lot of the feedback that happened in the prior planning sessions and all the different concepts. And the direction that we really started in was not to make substantial geometric changes, just because there was no general consensus on what the best approach was to do it. Also, the other consideration is cost, too. If we move the roadway, we're looking at a full depth construction to move that roadway over. And so it's another item that we had to be cautious about to try to get as much improvements as we could.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to point out that when we were working with Kohler and Colantonio before you came on board, that the planning board vetted many, many, many different concepts and scenarios, which involved using the common, the town lands, the common, and couldn't come up with anything that was really feasible that would work.
Right.
Jean Romer again. I just wanted to make one more comment on the sidewalk and also to ask if anyone here knows what board I would go to discuss this further. The idea of having the right equipment to plow a sidewalk in the winter. The selectmen, is that who I would go to? Because I was part of the original sidewalk committee that instituted the sidewalk from Harvard Road to the center of Stow. And it's bothered me since then that the sidewalk was put in but never plowed. And now it's been expanded, which is really nice, along the center of the town. And I think the sidewalk gives Stow a small town feeling. And as far as saying that plowing the roads would be like making the town like Lexington, sometimes I walk from Stow to Maynard along Pompasiticate Road, and Maynard plows that sidewalk, and it's not even, a super major one, but I feel much safer. I think that it would make Stow feel, first of all, it would substantiate the idea that Stow is pedestrian friendly and not just friendly to cars zooming through or zooming into the stores or whatever. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with cars, but it's an ethical issue. I would feel terrible if something happened to somebody, including myself.
Thank you.
Where do the sidewalks end going eastbound?
Eastbound. They end at the project limits, which is just to the east of White Pond Road.
Okay, so beyond the project, is there any consideration of taking that all the way into Maynard? Because right now, if you want to walk down to get an ice cream, you're putting your life into your own hands.
So the last round of the sidewalk committee I was on, and we basically created a priority for the town of if we're going to spend money, where should the next sidewalk go? Definitely along 117 to get to Erickson's. We all want to get to Erickson's, is up there on the list. I'm not saying or promising that the town's about to spend any money on it, but I think as we look towards where should the next sidewalk go, I know it's pretty far up there on the list.
I don't know as we can build a sidewalk into Maynard, though, to get that last little distance. But speaking of costs and such, I think I know the answer to this, but maybe for the record and the edification of this, I stepped out for a minute, so if I'm repeating, I'm sorry. You mentioned the construction is kind of driven by the grant, the amount of the grant that's available. In a way, that's kind of backing into things. In an ideal world, you'd say, well, what is it we want to build? And then I have a tiers of grants, and if it's 1 million or 3 million or whatever it is. But what is the number of the target grant that we're looking at for this project?
The grants are generally about $1 million. Where the project we have now is slightly over. We have seen projects get awarded slightly over if they're close to that amount. I think we had a project in Weymouth that had that situation where they were slightly over that amount, and they were awarded the full amount.
Yeah.
So that's about the ballpark that we're looking at.
What did you have to scale? You referenced we had to kind of stay within that as a budget figure. What would you have done differently, and how much of an extent more would you have gone if you didn't have that constraint?
Well, we definitely go all the way to Erickson, so we get you know, I mean, I think this project ended up being the right size. I think we got a little lucky with the length of the corridor. You know, I think that the costs are lower because we're choosing not to have textures such as granite out there. If we had granite out there, it would be a lot more expensive. When we started, we also heard that there was preference to have, you know, the blacktop sidewalks versus a concrete sidewalk. So there's a lot of savings just in those kind of materials alone. I don't know, Bridget, if there's anything else. I mean, I don't feel like we skimped on anything. I think that we tried to give a good project.
Yeah, I mean, there was different things
Yeah.
with
I hate to make
keep
going this, but on camera.
I mean, not that it's stuff you see, but there's underground, you know, we're putting in a whole new drainage system, and, you know, maybe in a perfect situation, we would be ripping up all of the old pipe and drainage structures that are there now, but then you're getting into a lot of excavation. So that was one of the things where we're going to be, you know, crushing, abandoning existing drainage structures, but there'll be brand new ones out there, you know, taking the water, and we're proposing actually a subsurface stormwater infiltration system, which will handle a lot of the flow that comes in. So, I mean, that's not stuff that you're going to see, but it's going to be an improvement out there.
Yeah, I think the only other, if you want to go ahead. Yeah.
So, Don, from a planning book standpoint, one thing that we really wanted to do is to either do underground utilities or move the utilities so that the view as you're going down the street has that. But that's a visual nicety, and it's very expensive. So if we had the sky's the limit, the budget, that would have been on the list.
I'm not encouraging that.
Yeah, the utility poles for one. If we had all the time in the world and and money, we probably would move the poles for one. And
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
One more thing about the grants is that even, you know, with this grant, or if you're going through like Mass DOT with the State Transportation Improvement Program, just the way everything is going now, people are talking about the sidewalks and the bike lanes, you kind of have to put those in your projects. That's how you get these funding availability. If we submitted something that was just the roadway, chances are we wouldn't get the funding. You know, they want even MassDOT, like all our projects going forward now have to have sidewalks on both sides and bike accommodations where feasible. So that's just the way these projects are going these days with getting the funding through grants or other ways, as opposed to just, you know, the town spending money on it. So that's
Thanks.
another reason.
What's the
Well, for the design process, we're going to be making refinements over the next couple of weeks. The application goes into the state at the end of this month. They typically take a couple months to award to the various projects. I think there were about 30 or so last year that did receive grant awards. If the project is selected to move forward with the grant, they're required to be shovel-ready by the spring of the next year. And we're looking at about a 1-year construction time frame for the project.
And are we going to get notifications for, like, I know I have a bunch of plants I'm going to have to move because I put the sidewalk in front of my place, I need to move a lot of stuff, so. Do I need to start doing that now, or do I get a notification saying that the project's going to start, or are you going to just tear up all my tulips and all my lilies and?
I mean, I think if you sign the sheet, I think we can keep everybody informed as to the status of the grant and whether it's awarded and when things will be started.
Yeah, no, I think that the town's been pretty active in trying to reach out to all the residents and butters, so definitely stay in touch with the planning department. I think that there are, excuse me, there are some instances where there are properties that do have things that are in the town layout. We're trying to stay out of the private property, but there are some instances where there are some plantings that do extend into the roadway that would have to be removed as part of the project if we're widening in that location. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Here I come. William Byron, Leesondale Road. In using the road in Lower Village, during the peak travel times, there's no protection for anyone coming out of, say, the shopping center, turning left to go eastbound. I've been in a situation where heading westbound and approaching that exit from the shopping center, there was a car attempting to get out and nothing coming eastbound, so I stopped and let this car out. I mean, during that time, you're only moving pretty slowly through there with the amount of traffic anyway. The driver behind me went bananas, and I'm not going to tell you what he did after that, but it wasn't wasn't very safe move. He ended up passing me. I don't know. Here's what I want to tell you. There are small shopping malls along one side in particular, and every time I go down to the bank there, I keep wondering why it can't be negotiated with the property owners to put a service road from one plaza to the next. And whether it could be done on both sides is another question, but in particular on that south side. And I would be looking at one traffic light. And it would be located probably in the vicinity of the shopping center. And I would take and reopen the passage from Pompasiticate over to Red Acre. I would make access from Red Acre into the shopping center so that at peak travel times, then someone didn't want to wait to attempt to make a turn one way or the other at either of these roads, could go into the shopping center and come to a traffic light that would sure hold up traffic, but traffic is traffic. When you get in it, you're in it. You have to sit through it and wait your turn. But that would be a break in the traffic and a protection. And if there was a service road at the other plazas and an approach from that side at the same location, so the light could control turns in either direction at that point. And I know the people on the planning board have heard this before from me, but, you know, they don't like, not them, but apparently people in Stowe don't like traffic lights. So, there you are.
Thank you for your comments, I appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Bill brings up a good point. I think the main point really is that what we're seeing right now, the traffic, is really just a part of the puzzle. And there is still a lot of other things that have to go on some of these properties as well, and through continued dialogue with the property owners. The idea of having these connections between lots to take some of the pressure off of having to re-enter onto an already congested roadway is something we've been talking about a lot, especially with some of the property owners. And then that ties into some of the zoning, and which I was mentioning earlier, the idea of where on the south side of Lower Village do the businesses sit? Do they sit way back? Do they sit closer to the road? And how those decisions get made in the future takes into account where would be the best place for a possible access. Would it be easier for some of these vehicles to enter in at one of these curb cuts and to be able to travel in a lot of places, even like down in Sudbury and along Route 20, you have some developments that are a little closer to the road, but most of the travel that's happening is behind the building and in the parking lots behind. So you're not constantly going back out to that roadway just to take a turn to only turn again in 100 feet. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to do at the same time, and unfortunately just looking at the roadway design is just part of that. So I just wanted to bring that up as the planning board continues to go forward with those kinds of issues.
Any other questions? I think that's it. Thanks everyone for coming out and all your good comments and questions. Bridget and I will be here for a little while. If anyone doesn't want to talk out loud and wants to hover around the map and point something out, I'd be glad to talk with them. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.